So I started ICS after serving as general counsel at UTC. I served there for 8 years. Like I was saying, I kind of did everything but divorces, but I was there during what I like to call the Title IX boom in 2011. It was a time after the Obama administration issued their Dear Colleague letter that really changed the game for higher education when it came to addressing and responded to allegations of sexual harassment. I tell you that just because my experience came at a time when no institution in the country knew what to do in responding to OCR's kind of new requirements. And our institution became a test case for the entire University of Tennessee system on what OCR's enforcement posture was going to look like, because we had a very high profile matter that hit right after the Dear Colleague letter back then that put us front and center in the news locally, nationally. We had student protests, we had all the things that we see all the time now, but we had them at that very outset. And that landed the university in a Title IX investigation with the Office for Civil Rights, litigation, all the things, a Clery audit, as well as UTK not long after ran into similar situation on a much bigger scale with the football team. So I became the go-to for all the campuses on implementing Title IX best practices at the time, hiring a Title IX coordinator. Before 2011, if you were to ask someone who's your Title IX coordinator, they're like, what are you talking about? Since that time, we have this entire profession and teams that's very new still. Even though it's been about a decade, it's still really new for all of us. And you're going to hear me say that a lot for those of you who are new to your role on the team, that even for seasoned folks, this is new because the landscape is constantly changing. And so since that time, so I left UTC, I saw my entrepreneurial spirit took over a little bit. I saw a need to blend the legal with the practical and to not only give institutions and school districts information on what the law requires or what guidance requires, but how to actually implement it, the practical, tangible tips. So as we go through today, you're not going to hear me give you a bunch of case law or legalese. Hopefully, it's really to give you some practical tools to consider as a team and to work through. We also serve as expert witnesses in litigation. And so I always have that lens as I'm training investigators and decision makers and advisors and all those different roles. And we serve as legal counsel for many institutions as well. But by and large, we're really talking to Title IX coordinators and investigators and decision makers each and every day. We're also doing the work. So Betsy Smith and Celeste Bradley are the leadership team on our team. Betsy is our Title IX director, Celeste, our EEO DEI director, and they are serving as virtual Title IX coordinators. We're interim Title IX coordinators at several college campuses right now and several school districts, but we also have, I don't even know at the moment, maybe 40 or 50 ongoing investigations as a team, as well as serving as decision makers and advisors. I tell you that because we are living all of this alongside of those of you on the ground. So whatever you're being trained to do, either through Title IX University or with Kristen and her team or with myself today, we are doing as well. So I try to give examples and lessons learned from our own experience. I always say there's really no substitute for experience, but even for ourselves as experienced, we think, investigators, we learn things every day. Different scenarios pop up, different personalities come into play. And so I'll try to bring all of that to you. And we will talk a lot about that too in our hypos. So that's a little bit about us and how I like to approach our trainings. But I really do also want to hear from you all in just a minute. Let me go through, I don't know why my thing is not fast forwarding. Let me go through a couple more housekeeping items, and then I'm going to turn it over to let everybody say hello and introduce themselves. So in these virtual trainings, we've done hundreds at this point. I prefer in person for sure, but we try to make this as interactive as possible. But a couple things I do want to note. One, we love the chat bar. Don't be afraid to ask a question in the chat bar at any time, or to share something with your colleagues at any time. You can interrupt me. It does not bother me. We will take breaks. Zoom fatigue is real. Having all of us sit here on a grid with as talking heads does get exhausting. So we'll take breaks every 50 minutes or so, and we'll have breaks to read the hypos and all of that. I am going to break you into breakout rooms to talk through these hypos and portions of the hypos, and then we'll come back in, probably in groups of 2, maybe 3. So just FYI for the second half of training. So that'll give you another break to kind of read the hypos, stretch your legs, and then come back with whomever you've been partnered with to talk through some of the concepts in the hypotheticals. We are also virtual, which is not perfect. We have storms happening here. I'm headquartered in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We've got lots of storms going on. Sometimes the internet just dies for no reason. If that happens, just stay put and I'll be right back with you. Amy Buck on our team, who's an attorney and legal analyst, she's here for a little while. Then she's got to leave for a meeting. We try to have another person just in case that happens. But if you'll just bear with me, give me a little bit of grace there, as well as I thought my kids would be at camp and all the things they're doing, and they will, but then they're also coming in and out of the house. And my 12-year-old is not the best at listening when I tell her I'm in a meeting. So she could potentially come and bomb our meeting at any time. So I want to just point that out as well. If you need a break at any time, though, take it. If you need to step away, obviously we're recording. So if you need to go back to a concept or something like that, no worries. But to the extent that you can be fully present, close down your email, silence your phone, that is fantastic. And to just focus on what we're covering today. And if you cannot participate by video, no worries. But if you can, I just know from experience that it helps you to stay engaged. It helps me to know you're out there and you're doing okay, especially as we get into the breakout rooms. But again, absolutely no judgment. Sometimes when I say that in trainings, people want to message me and tell me why they can't participate by video. It's okay. I don't need to know. Everyone's got different things going on, so no worries there. But if you can, fantastic. So our plan today, and I'll be honest with you, this is not 100% accurate as I was looking at it. We are focusing on the investigator's role in compliance, drilling down on bias and conflicts of interest, as well as some skills to think about as you move forward as investigators, and thinking about some things with your report writing and your sharing of the evidence and what is and is not relevant and those types of things. What I don't have on this roadmap is also the role of advisors, which we're going to talk about towards the end of training. And I mean training by me just talking through these slides, and then we're going to move into our hypos. They are long. There's 2 of them. The first one is really, we're going to work on investigative skills and thinking about different things in the process. And the second, we're going to kind of play advisor and questions that we might ask under either scenario, the complainant's information or the respondent's information. So that's kind of the plan for the second half. And the first half is me going through these slides with some questions for you all and some hypotheticals. So before I go forward, getting into the substance, I did want to take a moment to let you all say hello, introduce yourself, and hopefully you can hear all the things or remember what I'm about to tell you. So what I'd like to know is obviously your name, your role at USM, meaning are you in the Dean of Students office? Are you a faculty member? And then your role on the team, the Title IX team as investigator or advisor or what have you. My understanding is all of you are fairly new to the role, but if you are more experienced and you want to point that out, I would love to know that as well. It just helps me as we go through today. So I'm going to start with who I see on the screen, which is Charles, if that's okay. And then we'll just kind of go with the order that I see your names.
Sure. Charles Walter, or Chuck. I'm an academic advisor in the College of Business and Economic Development, and I am new to this Title IX investigative role. I've taken courses on Title IX before, but only as a faculty member or along those lines, but that's what I am.
Okay, well, welcome. I always say that I don't know how it works for USM, but I don't know if you guys volunteered or voluntold, but either way, it's on behalf of Kristen and her team, thanks for serving in this role. It's a big one. Kristen, I'll let you say hello really quick too, if that's okay.
Hi, Kristen Reynolds, interim Title IX coordinator, and they are we get recommendations from across campus of people who would be good for the roles, and we reach out and we tell them about the role and then ask if they'd be willing to serve. So it's not voluntold, but it is people who give us their names, and we reach out to them to see if they'd be interested. But we're very thankful
Fantastic.
for each one that tells us
Yes.
yes.
Yes, y'all are very lucky. I have so many that are like, I didn't even know what I was like, someone told me I'd like you to do this, and I said, okay, and they had no idea kind of what it entails. So that's a great practice. And you do have a great group, like numbers wise, which is fantastic as well.
Yeah, we have 2 campuses too. So it's like we try to get some people from our Coast campus and some people from our Hattiesburg campus. So some people on here are also on our Coast location.
Sweet.
And Jessica and Taylor are.
Oh, okay, great. EK, I'm assuming that's how we pronounce your name. Can you hear us? Oh, yay, there you are. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
All the above. EK Franks, I'm an executive athletic director here at Southern Miss. I'm excited to be in this new role, and I look forward to going. I actually had you when you did athletics a couple years ago. So.
Yay. And are you serving as an investigator?
Yes.
Okay.
Whatever they tell me.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever they tell you to do, you're going to do. Fantastic. Yay. All right, Erin.
Hi, Erin
go.
Sessions. Forgot where the mute button was. Deputy coordinator and deputy coordinator. So glad to have all y'all here. Thanks, Courtney and everybody.
Awesome. Jessica?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Jessica Langston from our Golf Park campus. I'm looking at the beach as we speak. I'm sorry. And you're welcome.
I was going to say, you've got to brag about it, but I will be on the beach tomorrow, so I'm okay with it right now.
Yes, then you will enjoy it and love it, I hope. I lead our student affairs efforts here on the coast, which involves student engagement, programming, development, all sorts of things like that, and also lead our university staff council as president. So I also deal a lot with staff, and I'm currently enrolled in a DEI course as part of a doctoral program. So I am triply excited to be here and learn today. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Taylor?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor Williams at USM Gulf Park as well. I'm an ex-Hattiesburger though, so I've double dipped on both campuses, but I work in academic advising now. I'm very excited to be here today.
And are Jessica and Taylor, are you both investigators? As far as you know?
I believe that's what the email said, yes.
Okay, great. Am I pronouncing this correctly, Nika?
It's NECA, but you
Nika, got it. Okay, thank you.
No problem. I'm NECA Ayozi. I'm the Assistant Director for Engagement in the Office of Inclusion and Multicultural Engagement on the Hattiesburg campus. And so,
And are you serving as an investigator as far as you know?
yes.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Wes.
Hello all, I'm Wes. I go by they, them pronouns, and I also serve in the Office of Inclusion and Multicultural Engagement. I'm the coordinator of PRISM, so I do all LGBTQ initiatives across campus, and I will be serving this team as an investigator.
Fantastic. And then Courtney.
Hey, I'm Courtney Robinson. Sorry, I'm homesick right now. I am an academic advisor in the College of Business and Economic Development, and I will be an investigator this time.
Great. Thank you. And I'm sorry you're sick. We've had that a lot on our
No,
team.
it's fine. I just want to make sure you know why you're not looking at me, because it's
okay.
offensive.
You don't even have to tell me, but
You don't want to see it.
Oh, yeah, I understand. I hope you feel better. Kristen, I can't see you anymore for some reason. Do we have any advisors on with us or planning to come today? I've lost her. She's still there?
The one advisor that we had that was supposed to be attending today, it hasn't logged in, and the other one wasn't able to be present for this training.
Okay, we're going to talk about the advisor role some, and I think it's really helpful.
Wes is an advisor.
Oh, okay, great. Perfect. There we go. Well, then we'll talk about that some, and I think it's also very helpful for our investigators. Okay, so I've told you our agenda and our housekeeping. We've all gotten to meet each other. And so just the last thing I want to say is just a reminder that even though I am a lawyer, what we're going through today is not legal advice. I always am going to send you to your legal counsel, but I am going to give you our perspective if there's a question or something like that. So just want to make that clear. I also want to say that we are in this together. I cannot say it enough. This is still very new. So even if you're new to the role and you're listening to all this and you're thinking to yourself, like, this is a lot to try to do myself, just know that even the most seasoned investigators out there have only been working under the new Title IX regulations and all of those requirements for 2 years. And so still very, very new. We learn things every day, living the regs, as we like to call it. And I also love when folks bring things to the table. So if you at any time have something you want to share with the group, maybe that you've learned in your role for the university, even if it wasn't on the Title IX team, something you've seen, please bring it forward. That's the benefit of having the team, quote unquote, together virtually. All right, so speaking of teams, as you all know, under the new 2020 regs, and even before, there was this requirement to have a Title IX coordinator. And I like to highlight this at the beginning of every training, because in this case, Kristen, is your leader. She is, I say all the time that really something that's missing from Title IX coordinator training is learning how to be a leader and a supervisor, because ultimately that's what that person is doing. She is your go-to for all things and all questions when you get into our process. I know you probably know that by now because you've had a training with her, but it cannot be emphasized enough. The other thing that the regulations did is mandate that you have folks in these specific roles. So for you all, somebody who's trained as a Title IX investigator, which you've done and are continuing to do, a decision maker who is not the same as an investigator, as your investigator in a case, an appellate decision maker, an informal resolution facilitator, if you're offering informal resolution, which I understand you all are, and advisors to serve in the live hearings, but you also have the option of an advisor as a party throughout the whole process. So I include them as part of the team. And then your responsible employees or officials with authority, I include as part of the team. That's defined in your policy and procedure. At a minimum, it's your coordinator. But just want to point it out as well, because these cases or these matters come through a lot of different mechanisms. It's not always straight from a complainant at the outset, and that can impact the your interaction with that complainant as an investigator. And I'll explain more about that in a little while. But that's your team. So you all are on a team together, whether or not you are in the same location. But it's good to know each other and meet each other if you haven't already, because there could come a time when you're serving as an investigator and you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't know where to go from here, or this is hard, or what have you. And we always say on our team, it's good to have a crutch, is kind of our word for it. Kristen is that person, but someone else on this team could also be that person. This is hard work, heavy work, sometimes feels very lonely. So to be able to call someone else and just say, look, this case is crazy. I'm not give all the details, but just to have somebody as a support can be really helpful. And Kristen, remind me, do you all do 2 investigators per investigation or 1?
So we do a team of 3 per investigation. Just there's 3 different perspectives. We tried to reach out to faculty, staff, different campuses, so you have those different perspectives.
Perfect.
And then we have 1 hearing officer who's our decision maker.
Perfect.
For the actual hearing.
That is huge. You should definitely give your coordinator like an applause, because having another investigator in with you or 2 can be really helpful and is going to help you out significantly in that role as far as your confidence and everything else. So let me start off, and I started off this training with, I want to talk about bias and conflicts of interest in serving impartially from the get-go. You've heard about it in the online training, and maybe have heard about it some from Kristen and other places, but I did want to sort of lay that foundation from the beginning of today's training. And the first thing I want to say is The thought process through an entire investigation should always be a fair and equitable process for both of the parties. Reminder, your parties are your complainant, the person who was alleged to have experienced the sexual harassment, and your respondent, who is the accused individual. And so throughout the process, you want to ensure that you're fair and equitable. And remember that there is no side. You are not on anyone's side, a complainant side or a respondent side. Your job is to stay neutral and to gather all of the facts and information. I like to say that you want to suspend your mind from the beginning to the end, and that is not something that comes naturally. Our natural instinct, they say that within 0.6 seconds or something of meeting someone, you have made an unconscious judgment about that individual, which is hard to change even after you get to know them. And so naturally, we want to bring our own experiences and everything else to everything that we do. But when it comes to these cases, and I can tell you from doing so many of them, I have to literally, I'll get a report and I have to say to myself, just read it with no judgment. Just read it with no judgment, because I immediately want to say, oh, I've seen this before. Oh, I know, that person did it, or this, it's very hard, especially when you see cases that are very similar with alcohol, especially, to not kind of immediately read it and jump to a conclusion. But as investigators, sometimes investigators will say to me, they understand the importance of being impartial, serving without a conflict of interest or bias, but at the same time, they're like, well, my role is not to make a determination. My role is to just gather information and facts. So if I have an underlying bias, that probably doesn't really matter. So what I would submit to you is it absolutely matters, because it will impact how you approach a party. So if you think that, let's say a complainant is truthful, then because you have had experience with that complainant, for example, maybe you had him in a class, then you're not going to go and elicit the information in the same manner from a respondent as you would if you didn't have that underlying opinion. So how you approach parties, it can be seen through nonverbals, it can be seen through your communication and how you speak to them or their advisor. All those things can impact the appearance and the actuality of neutrality. So what I put in the Title IX course that you've already taken, but I just want to emphasize, is what the regulations say is that you should not have a conflict of interest or bias generally towards complainants or respondents or in a specific case. Generally just means, although it sounds simple, but it's really not, that if you are somebody who always believes someone who brings a sexual harassment allegation is being truthful and someone who's being accused, they did it and that's the end of it, then you certainly shouldn't be serving in this role. In a specific case, seems easy button. There are some easy button things that we're going to go over in these hypos in a minute. One being that your spouse is a complainant in a matter. Then, okay, no, you should not be serving as an investigator. But it can get a little bit more gray at times. For example, I like to call them frequent flyers. If you're in student affairs in any way and you've seen this student before, and we're talking about a student-on-student case, maybe positive or negative. It could be that they are the president of SGA. We had a respondent in one case who was the president of SGA. The dean of students was adamant to me that he, in this situation, could be impartial as an investigator. And I said, but you can't just think about you and your own belief. What about the perception of that complainant? You know this SGA president, you interact with that person, they're on the board of trustees, all these things. And so we finally did get an external investigator in that case because of the high profile of that student. Same goes with employees. We have right now a situation where a respondent is the dean of students. And so, always thinking about your relationship with your colleagues and not only your own mindset of can I be neutral in this situation, but the perception of the parties. Of course, in that triaging phase at the beginning, those things are going to be thought about as Kristen and her team are thinking about who should serve as investigators. But I also want you, when you get that matter or you see the names of the parties, to be thinking about that. The other place I see this come up a lot for investigators, and again, I tell on myself a lot or my team because it's just real and we're human, is that sometimes parties have advisors who are very difficult and over time can wear you out. And so you are working with this party, everything's, quote unquote, going fine and going along, but you have an advisor or even a party or a parent who is just making you crazy. It is so hard not to let that impact and come through any frustration you might have in your communication, in your demeanor, working with the parties, and to not let that derail you from staying on track and fair and impartial as you work through the investigation. I'm telling you from personal experience, especially with these new regulations and the prescriptive requirements, a lot of these folks have very aggressive attorneys and are trying to make this into a courtroom. They don't understand the process at all on a campus. They have never really dealt with it. Maybe they're criminal defense attorneys or something like that, and they want to impute all that into this process. So I just want you thinking kind of from a 360 perspective, not just do I know this party or have a conflict of interest that exists, but also as you're going through a case, if you get to a point where as an investigator, and it's fantastic because there's going to be 3 of you, but one of you maybe is getting really fatigued communicating with the party and you find yourself, starting to have some of those biases start to come through because you literally cannot stand the way they're treating you, make sure you talk to Kristen, make sure you take a step away from it. And, if there needs to be a change in the middle, so be it. Again, it's helpful that you have a team of 3, but we have some advisors, even for us, that just berate us, like it's nonstop, sometimes 10 emails a day. And you've got to figure out where that balance is. And at some point, if you're going to cut them out of the process. So again, just want you to think about it for your own self-care perspective, as well as staying neutral throughout the process. It is the #1 challenge we see on appeal, is that there was a bias or conflict of interest by an investigator or Title IX coordinator. Most of the time, it's the number one reason you see it is because it's kind of all they have. They don't like the outcome. The easiest answer, the easiest challenge is to say the investigator was biased. So on the back end, if your investigation is appealed or or finding is appealed, and there's an allegation that one or more of the investigators was biased, just know that is normal. It doesn't necessarily mean you or your investigative team did anything wrong, but we do want you to be thinking about it throughout the whole process. So a lot of me, oh, sorry, my dog is about to freak out. A lot of me today will be being a cheerleader because I just want to allay any concerns you have in this role you've been asked to do and let you know, like normalize kind of what we do see on the ground so that when and if you face it, you can maybe be a little bit at ease. I was talking to a decision maker yesterday who is a lawyer and very experienced, but she came to our training when the regs came out and she was telling me, oh, I just kept thinking from your training, you kept telling me like, this is new for everyone. And I was like, oh, good, it does make an impact. So I want to just reiterate that for y'all too. And then biases. So this is not going to do anything justice. This is just a quick slide. Hopefully you all are able to do some professional development around explicit and implicit, especially biases. Celeste and our team does, entire trainings on this. So again, please note this is way more complex than what I have on one slide. And you saw this concept in 2 different slides in your training, most likely. But I just wanted to remind you, we all have biases, all of us. And some of them are ones that we're aware of and conscious of, and they're easier to check. And some of them are implicit and something we're not aware of. And so there's a lot of tools out there on the internet for doing some of that professional development. I always say I encourage you to do it just as a human, but also, of course, too, if you're going to be on this team and doing this work. My team has started, we were talking yesterday about, I was like, okay, I acknowledge I have a bias in this area. And we were talking about something, honestly, very silly. It had nothing to do with the work that we do, but we're always trying to think about that and just, as humans, do better. So something to think about as well for you. All right, so here's my questions for you. These are very just basic, high level for conflicts of interest and bias that I want us to think about. So you're an investigator and you receive an investigation, and the complainant is your child's best friend. So let's assume you have a child and their best friend goes to USM and the complainant is your child's best friend. In that scenario, do we have a conflict of interest or bias? What do you think? Yes or no? And you can either shake your head, that's fine, because that's an easier one, that works. Okay, so we all agree, yes, easy button. Let's say you are a professor, which I know most of you are not, or somebody who's encountered this person. They were a student that you had 2 years ago. What do you think? You're okay taking the case, you're not. What additional information would you want to know? What do you think? And you can unmute yourself, you can type it up in the chat bar. What are your thoughts?
Depends
Don't
on
be shy. Go ahead.
just depends on how, whether or not you remember the student. Depends on your interactions with the students. If they were memorable, what the context was, and it's kind of like an iffy one.
Yes, I would agree. So definitely a gray area. What we always say is just because they're your student, were your student, or just because you met them one time doesn't mean you're conflicted out, right? But you want to do that deeper dive. So exactly what Chuck said. You'd want to know a little bit more information. Do you even remember this person? Are they the ones bringing it to your attention? That sort of thing. So same with number 3. So the complainant, who's a university employee who you met briefly a few years ago at a football game. So probably not a conflict. Again, you know, if that's the extent of it, I think you're fine. But just want to do that deeper dive. All right, this was the one, every time I put it in a training, ends up, everyone has differing views. The respondent, or it could be the complainant, is a member of your sorority or fraternity that you were also a member of in college. And maybe you went to college 15 years ago, or maybe it was 5 years ago. What do you think? Anybody out there that member of Creek Life that has a thought? Go ahead.
I think for this one, I think it's gray as well, but I think you would be safer to dismiss yourself because of the bias, because if not, and I'm on the other side of that, I'm going to use that to appeal if it doesn't go my way.
I like it. So when I first did this hypo EK, I thought, no, it's no big deal. Like, that's what I thought in my head. And then the more I did the trainings, I was like, oh, well, I didn't really think about this or that. So I think Celeste on my team, she would say that if it were her sorority, she would have to recuse herself no matter what, because of, you know, that's just how she feels about her sorority. For me, I'm like, they're a member of my sorority, who cares? Like, I don't even think about that. So I agree. I think it's, again, something you would need to think about as you get into it. So again, these are just some food for thought, just to think about it as a team. Kristen is going to be vetting that at the very beginning, but I also want you all to be thinking about it as you're assigned a case. All right, so moving on to your role in compliance. So I want to highlight a couple things about your role and the importance of it. So when I was at UTC and I left to start ICS, I gave myself 6 weeks between starting the business and stopping work to kind of just take a breath. And so I was exhausted. I was the only person there at a campus of 12,000 and had 2 children during that time and all the things. And so I was like, I need a break. And I was sitting there thinking about, why did we find ourselves in OCR investigations? Why did we find ourselves in litigation? Why were all these grievances raised? You know, why me? I'm just kidding, but why? Why did all these things happen? And so, and what I kept coming back to was, at the end of the day, in every matter where someone was unhappy, by and large, it was because the individuals involved from the campus perspective either didn't know their role and understand it, or didn't even know they had a role in campus compliance. So I always talk about with my investigators, like knowing your role in each investigation is crucial. I always liken it to the 80-20 rule that comes with usually dieting or losing weight. Some might say 70-30. That 80% is what you eat and 20% is exercise. Both really important, but one moves the needle more than others, supposedly. So in compliance, I always say that there's this 80-20 rule. 80% of what gets you into challenges to your process and your in a matter is how a report is handled from the minute it comes in until it's over. Somewhere along that way, a party or both parties, usually they're both upset, is not happy with how they were treated or how the process went forward. Now, as investigators, especially, you all have almost the most interaction with the complainant or respondent throughout a process. You have the most impact on their experience. Yes, Kristen or whoever is doing intake has a huge impact on their trust of the process as they go through it. But as investigators, how those individuals are treated and their understanding of the process and your role in it is crucial. Now, I'm not saying that if you do everything I tell you right, you'll never get sued or you'll never have an investigation, because that's just not true. But what I am saying is it will make the process as palatable as possible for these parties. So your procedures and your policies and your trainings, obviously very important, but how you handle that report and how you do the investigation is really tantamount to the experience of the parties. Also, just a reminder that you all are serving, most of you, as investigators, but there's so much more to compliance on your campus. And I bring this up because we're seeing a shift in Title IX compliance to, it feels very compliance oriented, right? Under these regs, it feels very clinical. You have all these procedures that you have to follow. But we also want you to remember there's a lot of other things that go into compliance, including your education, training, prevention efforts, which includes the care and support of those parties. So while you're in this role of that really does fall in the compliance bucket, for USM, we want folks to think of Title IX as more than just these investigations. And you all do a really good job of that with your Twitter presence and your social media presence. I love it. I tell institutions all the time to look at what you're doing because it's very accessible and very speaks to in my opinion, I haven't been a college student in a long time, but to that audience. But we always want you to remember that too as investigators, because you do have this sort of clinical role, but we still want you to be human and be yourself as you're interacting with both the parties and witnesses. I also want you to remember your end game. So your end game is to investigate whether there is a violation of your policies and procedures. It is not a criminal investigation, although you could have one that is ongoing at the same time, which can get complicated. It's not a civil lawsuit. So if you're somebody who likes to watch Law and Order or any of these legal things out there, this is not your time to try those techniques out that you see in the courtroom. Our law enforcement folks with the law enforcement background struggle with this. Attorneys struggle with this. Those of you who are administrators, which is almost all of you, or working with students and staff, you're fully equipped to do this job. You have the demeanor already. You're used to talking to students and faculty and staff. So that is all you're being asked to do, is have a conversation and figure out if there is a violation of your policies and procedures. So the whole you can't handle the truth. You were there at 3 a.m., weren't you? That's not going to happen in these investigations, okay? We're asking open-ended questions. We have to always remember these are members of your community, no matter what. They're not adverse. This is not an adversarial process. So a couple of myth busters. You do not, I'm just going to help you out here. You do not have to be a lawyer or a police officer or have a law enforcement background to be a good investigator. I promise you have everything in your tool set to do the job that you've been asked to do in this Title IX process. There is also not one way to conduct an investigation. So when we see in litigation all the time, lawyers want to pick apart what happened in an investigation, but the reality is, and what I testify to all the time as an expert witness, is there's not one way to do this. We have our principles and our guidelines that are established by your policies and procedures. So you're going to stick to those, and the regulations, and those will all be similar. Other than that, there's no one way. Are there best practices? Yes, to a degree, being trauma informed and all of that. But there are going to be times when you put together a plan that's, I'm going to investigate, I'm going to talk to the complainant, then the respondent, then witnesses. There could be another investigation where you've got to talk to witnesses before a respondent because of availability or something like that. So there's not one way to do this, as long as you're staying within the box of what's dictated by your policies and procedures. That is your home base always. I always say your homework is to bookmark your policy and procedure on your desktop. That is your home base. You should be looking at it constantly, looking at those definitions of sexual harassment that you're asked to investigate constantly, referring back to the formal complaint and the notice of allegations constantly. But other than that, there's no, you don't have to be Courtney Bullard or whoever to do it. You just need to be you. And then this idea that you have to be certified to be an investigator, we do provide certifications because that's kind of what everyone in the profession is looking for. I say this because we have people walk into investigations and say, what are your qualifications to do this? We've had complainants ask it, advisors ask it. So, you're going to have certificates and you've taken trainings to be able to respond with. But if you have the unfortunate circumstance of having a difficult party who really wants to challenge you or your teammates' qualifications, I just want to always put out there, like, none of these are a prerequisite. It's just that you get trained per the regulations, which you've had, and we're drilling into today, and that you follow your policies and procedures. But I do want to remind you, again, back to knowing your role in this investigation, that you need to stay in your lane. So this is probably the number one mistake we've seen over time with investigators. I think for you all having a team, it's helpful for sure, because you all can keep each other in your lanes, but your role is as a fact gatherer, information gatherer, and the burden is on you. Remember, the regulations say the burden is on the institution, not the parties, to get all that information. I'll talk about that more in a little while. But if you have an NOA, again, your formal complaint and that notice of allegations and your policy and procedures are your home base for your investigation. It's going to tell you what you're investigating. So if you're investigating and you start going somewhere else in that investigation outside of those confines, there's going to be an issue. So you want to go to your Title IX coordinator and get clarity. Let's say you start investigating a matter. Well, actually, I think it's in these hypos, so give me a moment. But let's say you're in an employee-employee matter like I have on this slide, and you start investigating sexual harassment bucket 2, that severe, pervasive, objectively offensive standard. And it comes up that this manager that is part of the investigation is stealing from the company. This might be on my next slide, I can't remember. Is that your job to start investigating that or not? That's what you need clarity on. And so I would tell you, no, you need to get it to your Title IX coordinator so she can refer it on to whichever department is the appropriate department, most likely HR, to look into that issue. But you want to be crystal clear with the parties on your limitations with an investigation and what you are investigating and what you are not investigating, because it never fails. I call it like throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what will stick. Parties want to tell you everything. They want to tell you their dog's name and the fact that, their parents divorced when they were 10 and whatever else they want to tell you. And so you have to constantly come back to your home base. And they also want to tell you what other people did wrong that have nothing to do with investigation. So thinking about this example, Xander alleges stalking against Charlotte. Both the formal complaint and the notice of allegations involve stalking allegations. During the investigation, a witness informs you that Charlotte stalked his best friend, Alex, when they broke up. What do you do? So again, you have Xander as the complainant, Charlotte as the respondent, stalking allegation. And during the investigation, you're talking to a witness and they tell you Charlotte stalked their best friend when they broke up. What do you do with that information? What do you think?
Ask for clarity. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead, NECA.
I would ask for clarity because how it's worded, I don't know if you're saying that Charlotte and the witness were together and then Charlotte stalked Alex, who was the best friend, or you're saying that the witness that Charlotte and Alex were together, and then when Charlotte and Alex broke up, she started stalking Alex, who was her ex.
Yes, so that is what you said second is what I'm trying to get across in my poorly worded hypothetical. So what they're saying, the witness is saying, hey, Alex and Charlotte were together one time and Alex stalked Charlotte. Charlotte stalked Alex when they broke up. In other words, Charlotte has issues with stalking other people. And let me give you this example that Charlotte stalked my friend when they broke up. So with that in mind, it's another allegation of stalking against Charlotte that has to do with somebody else. So what would you do with that as an investigator? So you gain clarity. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I would think that you would need to bring that to Kristen or maybe to Aaron because it does kind of establish a history that's relevant to the case. But I don't know if it's your job as an investigator in the current case. I wouldn't believe it would be your job to investigate a past situation.
100%. Go ahead, Nika. I'm sorry.
I have a question. I wouldn't go further in terms of investigating that incident of stalking, but to me, it's significant enough to note under information that the witness has given me regarding this case, because that shows a pattern of behavior.
Okay, so this is the $100,000 question. So I would agree with Jessica that if you remember this whole process, right? Charlotte can't be investigated for this other thing of stalking without a formal complaint and a notice of allegations and a meeting and all the things. So it's got to go to Kristen for Kristen to reach out to Alex, complainant Alex, to say, hey, this allegation came forward, we'd like to get more information, and do the whole thing that she or Aaron does with any complainant. As an investigator, what happens is a lot of times the complainant's advisor, if they're an attorney too, will be like, well, I want all this in here. I want to show a pattern of behavior. But if you don't have someone who's been found responsible for that behavior, using it against them in a case can be a real problem. So you've got to be really, really careful. So what I would say is you're going to have that information from that witness. You're going to get it to Kristen. You might footnote it or put it somewhere in your own notes that you referred that information on, but I would be very, very reticent to put it in your report as any kind of information that's relevant at this point. What's going to happen is, and not to get too in the weeds, I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, but let's say that Alex does want to be a complainant and that gets investigated. It could be that Kristen or Aaron decide to do some kind of concurrent investigation. Who knows? It can get really complicated if there's more than one issue going on against the same respondent. But at the end of the day, the sanctioning will depend on maybe Charlotte has 3 different allegations of stalking against her by 3 different complainants. Until she is found responsible, we're not going to use that against her in the sanctioning. Does that make sense? So it gets real complex real fast. But I just want to point that out to you all because you want to stay within your NOA, because Charlotte's going to come back later and say, my notice of allegation says I stalked Xander, and now I'm being accused of stalking someone else, and I don't have any information about this. Does that make sense? Clear as mud? Yes. Okay, perfect. So we want you to go to Kristen. Go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in these types of situation, you might hear rumors. So the witness might be reporting something that was a rumor that they heard from somebody else. So you have to be take precaution when you're getting, I guess, lack of a better way to say it, hearsay on what has been shared, what rumors are out there, because a lot of times you will get a lot of that information in investigation. And unless the person who's actually experienced it has come and reported, and it's been investigated, we don't want to use that as facts towards a case. Does that make sense?
Okay, so same hypothetical. During the investigation, Charlotte, our respondent, informs you that she was sexually assaulted at a football party by Max. Max is not involved in this investigation. What do you do? So same thing, we've got Charlotte as a respondent, Xander as a complainant, stalking allegation. During your interview of Charlotte, she says, hey, I was sexually assaulted at a football party 2 weeks ago by this person named Max. What do you do?
Wouldn't that be a separate investigation that we take to Kristen?
There we go. EK is about to say the same thing. Yeah. So again, really no, not to give away the farm, but you're just, the answers are go to Kristen. So you're going to go to Kristen, and then Kristen's going to meet with Charlotte, and Charlotte could become a complainant in a whole other something. But again, as an investigator, you're going to stay with your NOA and your formal complaint. All right, so same hypo. Xander is alleging stalking against Charlotte. And during the investigation, Xander tells you that he had what he perceives as non-consensual sex with Charlotte one night. She woke him up, or he was asleep and he woke up and she was having sex with him. So it's an allegation of sexual assault, rape. What do you do?
When we send that to Kristen, because we're investigating the stalking allegation.
100%. And what do you think Kristen's going to do? She's going to add it to the NOA, the notice of allegations, and redistribute it to the parties so that you can investigate this additional allegation against Charlotte. Okay, so maybe it started as stalking. Now you've got stalking and sexual assault, rape, right? So we want to make sure that Charlotte, the respondent, knows everything that she's being investigated for. So Kristen will re-put out that notice of allegations, and it will most likely become a part of your investigation. But again, we've had some situations where decision makers have found respondents responsible for stalking and sexual assault, but it started out as sexual assault. And so you've really got to think about those procedural guardrails that are in place in these regulations for both the complainant and the respondent. And that NOA, the reason it's so important is it's how the parties are on notice of what they're being investigated for. So if you get more allegations, which happens all the time, you get into an investigation and more things start coming out, including additional dates. With stalking, we know there's like lots of potential incidents that all come together to maybe make up an allegation of stalking. So let's say the notice of allegation says on December 1st and December 10th, these things happen, and you get in the investigation and you learn also on January 7th and January 15th, this happened. Kristen's going to need to update that NOA to get all those dates and all those incidents in there. So again, really, really critical to just always be referring back to that. And as more information comes forward, you let her know so she can update the NOA. It's hard to remember in the thick of an investigation, but you all are going to remember it because you got a team of 3 and I've drilled it in your head. All right, so we are right at the hour almost. So I'm going to give you all a 5-minute break.
I have a quick question.
So,
okay, so on the NOA, what you were just saying, can I just clarify that you were saying, say, different instances, like different times that we get this information, we want to take it back to Kristen. Did you say that that is 2 different reports, or we continue with the same one?
You will continue most likely with the same investigation. Great question. She's just having to continue to update that notice of allegation so the parties are fully aware of what's being investigated. But in the example that I gave you a few minutes ago, where it was stalking and then sexual assault, you're just going to continue with the same investigation and start also adding in those sexual assault allegations, which might mean maybe you've already talked to Xander, the complainant, and you've already talked to Xander, you get that additional information, but you haven't talked to Charlotte yet, then you're going to incorporate that for your questioning with Charlotte. So your questioning is going to now include the stalking stuff and the sexual assault stuff, but all in one report.
Okay, and then I just have a second follow-up to that.
Sure.
So if we contain this within one report, and we send this to Kristen. Sorry, this has happened on our campus. So I'm
No,
just,
I get it. People are always like, did you get this hypo from our campus? And I'm like, no,
Okay.
this is what we see all the time.
Yeah. So say I took this stuff to Kristen and I had information about this student in a different realm with another student. Would I want to continue like with what NECA is saying with like formulating who this person is, and maybe this is a pattern? Would I want to bring some of that other information into this, or would I go into this unbiased? Because it would be, you know, maybe it's happened a couple times, or I've heard about it a couple times, not necessarily to the point of where I need to report it, but it has happened. Could you just answer that for me?
You mean like rumors that it's happened? Or they've been found responsible previously?
I say with this instance, I'll go with rumors, but I think that it was more in depth. But right now I'm just worried about the rumors.
Okay.
Specifically.
So I think I would troubleshoot that with Kristen, for sure. And it's hard talking in the abstract. I don't know that I fully understand what happened, but what I would say is, number one, from a conflict of interest or bias standpoint, if you have heard rumors about someone over a period of time and now they're the subject of investigation that you're going to be working on, I may not want to be doing that investigation. I think it's very hard to stay unbiased when you've heard a lot of rumor and innuendo. We see that a lot in the faculty context, frankly, where there's been a lot of allegations against a faculty member that they've acted inappropriate, but nothing that's like been founded, been in an investigation. So that's the first thing I would say. And then second, I guess I would just go back to my prior point, if I'm understanding what happened correctly, of, you know, using a pattern or practice in an investigation to say, well, this was happened or that happened. I would stay away from. I would stay with evidence and information that you have, and anything that happened ancillary to that will get handled in the decision-making stage. Because if Kristen, so remember, she's the keeper of all things. So she may know about another situation with that same respondent, but doesn't tell you as the investigator. She wants you to do an investigation just into this particular situation.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the disciplinary action, if let's say in this case, Charlotte was found responsible by a decision maker, your hearing officer, Kristen may already know Charlotte's on probation, right, for something else. So they're going to deal with that in the sanctioning piece. But if there's like rumor and innuendo swirling about someone, it happens a lot, actually, especially in the faculty context. It can get very dangerous if you know of that and you suspect and you yourself tend to believe what you've heard, especially, you know, then I would probably be taking myself out of it. Does that help?
No, that answered it perfectly, honestly, for me, because it was just, it's eerily similar to this. And I had questions during that where I resourced other people. So it kind of makes me feel better that I pulled in other people rather than just trying to handle it myself. And I feel like this is a good area to ask those questions because it did kind of tip the line. And I know that provided a lot of clarity. So thank 100%. You.
100%. And listen, there's a lot of gray in this area.
Yes.
Like, I don't care if people tell you it's all black and white. It is not. The same Title IX coordinator could do one thing with one set of facts and another one do something totally different with the same set of facts and both be right. That can happen. A decision maker can take the same set of facts and find responsible, and another one could find with the same set of facts not responsible and both be right, technically, you know. So there's just a whole lot of gray, and there's also the exacerbating factor of things that fall outside of Title IX and then things that are in Title IX. And so it can get really complicated really fast. It's a great question.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate it.
Sure. Taylor?
Okay, so just to confirm. So in the last hypo, since it was the same parties, the complainant and the respondent, that's why when we looped Kristen in, it was reverted back to us because it all is combined. But if
exactly
it's
right
person, that's when it's a whole nother process.
Possibly. So yes, most likely. There might be situations where, let's say Charlotte was alleged to have sexually assaulted 3 people in the same night, like same instance. Okay, we've had situations of threesomes, for example, same respondent, 2 complainants. You might be asked to investigate all of it and kind of treat it differently, but like combine it because the instances overlap, but even though it's different parties. But generally speaking, if you have, you know, like, I don't know, this, like a totally separate, unrelated matter, then yes, it's probably going to get into its own pathway. But there are times when you might be combining a process. I've really only seen it in the sexual assault context so far. I'm trying to think if I've seen it in stalking, where it's alleged multiple, like one respondent, multiple complainants, overlapping dates and instances of and DV. Yes. So, so not always, but yes, in general, that's probably going to be the case, but you never know. Like I said, there's just a whole lot of gray and things that we can't, like I always say, the truth is stranger than fiction. You know, you can't really, you never can predict what's coming out. We're still continuously surprised at times, but I think that's a good way of looking at it as a general rule. Becca?
Okay, so I think I have an understanding of the last one. The last one we would add to the NOA. The one before that would potentially be a separate NOA because it is a completely different person. And the one before is not an NOA because Alex is not an official complainant. And it's so until Alex becomes the complainant, it is just rumors and we treat it as such.
Yes, exactly. Very well said. Exactly.
Okay.
And I know sometimes with hypos, like especially when we do the bigger one, people are like, well, what's the answer? And I'm like, well, I don't really have an answer. You know, it depends. And so that's why we want to troubleshoot it as a team and think about how we might handle things in different circumstances. So excellent, excellent questions. I love it. All right, so I am going to officially give you a break. I would say it is almost 10 after, so let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 20 after. Return. So I will see you in a few, and if you come back with questions, great, don't hesitate to ask them. So I'll see y'all in a minute.